It was the quietest part of the day when the message arrived. I was by the window staring at the empty road when my phone buzzed. The words on the screen hit me like a door. They said your husband checked in with another woman yesterday. My heart fell and my hands went numb. I had buried surprises before, but never this close to home. For a woman who had trusted and given everything, the sentence felt like a verdict. Stay with me. I will tell you what I did next. If you are watching, please like and subscribe. I was standing in my living room that afternoon, arranging fresh flowers in the vase the way I always did on Thursdays. The sun was coming through the curtains softly, and for a moment, everything felt normal. The kind of quiet routine a woman my age depends on just to feel steady. Then my phone rang. It was my close friend, Linda, someone who never calls unless it is something important. The moment I picked up and heard her voice, I knew already that something wasn't right. Her breathing was uneven, like she had walked fast or carried a heavy weight to get to the phone. She didn't greet me the way she normally does. She simply said my name in a low, almost shaking tone. When she finally spoke the words, it felt like the air in the room shifted. Your husband checked in with another woman yesterday, at the Blue Marlin Hotel. Just like that. Plain, sharp, without any soft place for me to land. I froze. My fingers slipped slightly, and the petals I had been trimming fell to the floor in pieces. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, louder than Linda's voice on the phone. She repeated the name of the hotel again, and the details, almost whispering, because she didn't know how else to say something that painful. She told me the staff had seen him laughing with the woman, signing the check-in paper confidently, not even trying to hide. I didn't answer her right away. I couldn't. It felt like the world inside my chest had collapsed in one single second. I had spent 40 years with that man, cooking for him, caring for him, protecting his dignity, trusting his words, even when they were thin and tired. 40 years of believing that no matter what storms we survived, we would survive together. And now this, a truth so sudden and so cruel, it felt like someone had ripped something straight out of my ribs. Linda kept talking, apologizing, saying she didn't want to be the one to tell me, but she couldn't sleep. Knowing he was doing this behind my back, I barely heard her. My eyes stayed on the window, staring at nothing, like my mind was trying to hold on to something steady before it spun out of control. All I could think about was that name, the Blue Marlin Hotel, a place he once took me for our anniversary many years ago, when we still cared about the small things. The thought of him going there with another woman felt like a punch I wasn't prepared for. My knees felt weak, so I sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa, feeling the weight of 40 years pull me downward. Betrayal doesn't always come with screaming or breaking dishes. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a whisper that knocks the entire world off its balance. And that's exactly how it felt. Quiet, heavy, final. I didn't cry. The shock was too big for tears. I just sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the faint crackle on the line while Linda waited, unsure if she should continue or hang up. I finally managed to take a deep breath and tell her thank you. Not because I wanted to know this. No woman wants to hear something like that. But because truth is better than living blind. A woman my age has learned one thing. Lies rot the heart faster than grief. When I hung up, the silence in the living room felt enormous. I looked down at the petals on the floor, soft and broken, scattered like pieces of something that could never be put back together the same way. For a moment, I felt exactly like them, cut, quiet, falling apart. But under all that shock, something else began to grow. Not rage, not tears, something colder, something clearer. A thought that whispered inside me, slow but firm. If he believed I would crumble, he didn't know me at all. I stood up, wiped my hands, and picked up the fallen petals one by one. My body was shaking, but my mind wasn't. I wasn't going to confront him, yet I wasn't going to scream or beg or demand answers. No. I decided right then that if he wanted to play with my life, I would answer him with silence, patience, and a plan so sharp he would never see it coming. Because that day, as the shock settled into my bones, I realized something important. A woman who survives betrayal becomes more dangerous than the one who fears it. That evening, when he walked through the door, acting like nothing had happened, I felt something inside me go quiet. Not angry, not sad, just silent, like a switch flipping in my mind. I had spent the entire day replaying my friend's words, the hotel name, the timestamp, and the way my own hands had trembled as I picked up the fallen petals from the floor. But I didn't show any of that when he came into the kitchen, humming softly like he always did after a business trip. Instead, I set the table as if it were any normal night, placed his plate in front of him, and watched as he loosened his tie with that casual confidence I had once admired. I asked him, in the calmest voice I could manage, how his trip had gone. He didn't miss a beat. He smiled, faint but polished, the kind of smile people use when they believe they're smarter than you, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Same as always, dear," he said, not even looking at me, reaching for the salt as if we were discussing weather, not betrayal. That smile, it wasn't warm, it wasn't even nervous, it was dismissive, practiced, like a man who had rehearsed his lies for so long that the truth had become nothing more than an inconvenience he didn't have to deal with. I kept watching him, studying the little things I never paid attention to before. The way he avoided eye contact, the way he wiped his mouth too fast, the tiny twitch near his temple when he lied, the slight lift in his shoulders as if he expected praise for his performance. He didn't know I already had the hotel name, the time, the witness. He didn't know that my shocked silence from earlier had already transformed into a decision, and as he took another bite of the meal I had cooked with hands still shaking from the truth, I smiled too. But my smile was different. Mine wasn't born of comfort, mine was born of clarity. While he thought he was fooling me, I realized I wasn't dealing with the man I had loved for 40 years. I was dealing with someone who had grown too comfortable lying to my face, someone who thought age had softened me, someone who believed loyalty meant blindness. That was the moment, right there, in the space between his lie and my silence. When something inside me shifted, I understood that exposing him wasn't going to happen through screaming or crying. It was going to happen through planning, patience, and precision. So I kept my smile, calm and steady, the same one he used, except mine held something he didn't recognize: strength. Because while he thought I was sitting across from him as the same wife he had walked over for years, I was already somewhere else in my mind, building the first steps of the plan he would never see coming. I sat there after dinner, watching him pretend everything was normal, and my mind drifted back through the years we had shared. We met when we were only 21, young and hopeful, believing that love alone could solve every problem life handed us. I remembered the tiny apartment we began our marriage in, peeling paint, secondhand chairs, and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls without stretching. But back then, it felt like a palace because we were together, and I trusted him with my whole heart. I trusted every word he spoke, every promise he made, and every smile he gave me. I built my entire life around that trust. When our son was born, everything changed for me. I became a mother first, a wife second, and a woman last. I gave up my job because he said one income was enough, and a child needs his mother at home. I didn't argue. I thought it was love. Every morning, I cooked breakfast, packed lunches, kept our home running, and supported him through every promotion, every business trip, every late night he claimed was spent working. I stood by him when money was tight, when bills stacked up, when he felt lost. I stayed up late sewing buttons onto shirts, ironing suits, cleaning messes no one thanked me for. That was my life, giving without expecting anything in return. Over the years, I watched my own dreams fade into the background. The career I once imagined, the hobbies I loved, the quiet hopes I carried, they all disappeared as I poured myself into keeping the family steady. He never noticed how much I gave up. He never even asked. He assumed I would always be there, waiting, smiling, forgiving, caring. I told myself it was fine because I had a family, a home, and a man I believed would never betray me. I told myself that loyalty was enough to keep a marriage strong. But now, thinking back, I realized the cracks were starting long before that hotel call. Small things I ignored. Times when he came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Times when he would sit in the car before entering the house, finishing conversations he didn't want me to hear. Times when he would delete messages, say his battery had died, or keep his phone on silent during dinner. I brushed it off each time because I believed in the man he used to be, not the man he had become. I held on to the version of him from our early years, not wanting to admit that he had changed, and I had simply refused to see it. I remembered birthdays he forgot, anniversaries he treated like ordinary weekdays, arguments he dismissed with a wave of his hand. I remembered moments when I tried to talk about my feelings, and he would say, "Don't be dramatic," or "You always worry too much." Slowly, year by year, he pushed me into a corner without even realizing it. Or maybe he did realize, maybe he just didn't care. When a woman stays quiet for too long, she becomes easy to ignore. That was me. I became invisible in my own home, and still I stayed. I stayed because I believed a long marriage should be protected, even when it hurts. I stayed because our son looked up to him, and I wanted our family to stay whole. I stayed because I thought loyalty could fix anything. But loyalty means nothing if the other person has already broken the unspoken rules of love. As I sat there remembering our life, I realized that maybe I wasn't shocked about the hotel. Maybe I had always known somewhere deep inside. Maybe I had just been too afraid to say the words out loud. He is not the man you built your life around anymore. The truth settled in my chest like a heavy stone. I had given him 40 years, my best years, without ever imagining he would give his attention, his time, and our money to someone else. That woman had not lived my sacrifices. She had not wiped tears, raised children, or built a home. She had not stayed awake nights worrying about bills or future plans. She had simply appeared and taken the version of him that I had shaped with my own effort. And he allowed it, gladly. That night, as these memories and realizations poured over me, something inside me hardened. Not anger, not heartbreak. Something quieter, stronger. The understanding that I had been loyal to a man who no longer valued loyalty. I realized that all the years, all the sacrifices, all the love had been real, but only from my side. And from that moment, my heart stopped being his. I knew what I needed to do. I knew that my story was no longer about saving my marriage. It was about saving myself. After that phone call, my mind began replaying the last few months like a long, painful film. I started seeing things clearly for the first time, things I had brushed aside as nothing, things I told myself were normal because I trusted him, things that now looked like warnings I had ignored. The small changes had been there all along, I just didn't want to admit them. He had begun coming home late, saying he had extra meetings, even though he was supposed to be semi-retired. Sometimes he walked in smelling like a hotel lobby, that mix of air freshener, perfume, and something too clean to belong to a man who claimed he had been working all day. He never used to care about his appearance, but suddenly he was shaving more often, wearing cologne again, and ironing his shirts with extra care. I thought maybe he just wanted to feel younger. I supported it. I encouraged it. But now, thinking back, I understood that he wasn't dressing for me. At night, he guarded his phone like a hawk guards its nest. If a message came in, he would place the screen face down. If he needed to check something, he would step outside or turn away from me. When I asked him once who he was texting, he laughed and said, "Just people from work." I believed that lie because I wanted to. I had loved this man for 40 years. I raised his child. I did not want to imagine him sharing parts of his life with someone else. Even at the dinner table, he had changed. He used to talk to me about everything. Our son, the house, our neighbors, even random little things he saw during the day. But slowly, the conversations died. He stopped asking how I felt or how my day went. He no longer noticed when I cooked his favorite meal. He looked at the TV more than he looked at me. And when I sat across from him, trying to speak, he would give short, cold answers. Not angry, just distant, like his mind was somewhere else, somewhere far away. There were moments that still sting even now. Like when he left his laptop open one afternoon and jumped across the room just to slam it shut when I walked in. or when I found a small gift box in his coat pocket, expensive earrings, and he said, "Oh, those are for a client." I didn't argue, but deep down, my heart had already begun to understand something painful. I was no longer the woman he wanted to impress. Another sign was money, little transactions, $50 here, $100 there. I saw them on our bank statements but didn't question them. I assumed they were for house repairs or lunches. But now I remembered how, once, I asked him about a strange charge at a restaurant I had never been to. He said, "You worry too much," and walked away. That answer had felt wrong at the time, but I pushed the feeling aside. He stopped touching me too. Not even a gentle brush of the hand or a warm hug from behind while I cooked like he used to do. At night, he slept facing away from me. Some nights he stayed up late in the living room, coming to bed only when he thought I was asleep. Other nights he claimed he was too tired to talk. I pretended not to notice the new distance between us. I thought maybe age was changing us both. I thought this was normal for older couples. I thought marriages changed. I told myself to be patient. But those thoughts were lies I told myself to keep from feeling the truth. Looking back, I remembered the way he flinched when I asked if everything was all right. He would force a smile, pat my hand, and say, "Don't worry about silly things." But his eyes always darted away. His voice always carried a tightness. I should have paid attention to that. Even our son had noticed something different in him. He once asked me quietly, "Mom, is Dad okay? He seems strange lately." I told him not to worry. I said his father was just tired. I didn't want my son to think something was wrong in our marriage. I thought protecting my husband's dignity was the same as protecting our home. But it wasn't. I was protecting a lie. The slow erosion of trust is not loud or dramatic. It's a quiet breaking. It slips into everyday routines and settles like dust on forgotten shelves. It hides in canceled plans, unexplained smiles, unfinished sentences, and long silent drives. It shows itself in moments you think are small, but later they become the clues you wish you hadn't ignored. By the time I stood in that living room with flowers slipping from my hands, hearing my friend say those words about him checking in with another woman, I realized everything had been pointing to this moment. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. But I also felt strong, because now the truth was in front of me, and I was no longer blind. The betrayal did not start at the hotel. It started in these small moments, these quiet shifts, these stolen glances and hidden messages. And now that I finally understood, I knew one thing clearly. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to break. I was going to plan. The next morning, after he left for work, I sat alone in the quiet house with a feeling I couldn't shake. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was something sharper, something clearer, a sense that the truth was finally within reach, and all I had to do was stop protecting a man who had forgotten how to protect me. I stood up slowly, walked to his study, and stared at the neat desk where he kept all his things. For years, I had avoided touching anything on that table because he always insisted it was private. But now, I realized privacy had become another word he used to hide lies. I reminded myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was looking for the truth that belonged to me as much as it belonged to him. His tablet lay on the desk, charging. He always bragged about how modern he was, syncing everything to every device so he would never lose a thing. He never imagined that habit would betray him. I took a deep breath and tapped the screen. It opened without a password. He had disabled it months ago, claiming it made life easier. For once, I agreed with him. Within seconds, messages began syncing from his phone, appearing one by one, like little fragments of the life he'd been living behind my back. At first, they looked like normal conversations, work reminders, bills, news alerts. Then one thread caught my eye, a chat labeled with nothing but a heart emoji. I clicked on it. There she was, a young woman, probably the same age as our son, with a face full of filters and long hair that looked like it took hours to style. She called him baby and my man, words I hadn't used in years because life had become busy, tiring, real. But she wrote them with ease, like she had all the time in the world. My hand shook slightly, but I kept scrolling. Their messages weren't just romantic, they were detailed. They talked about hotels, restaurants, private outings, and then I saw it. Blue Marlin Hotel, room 304. A photo of him smiling with her in the mirror behind him, his hand around her waist, her head on his shoulder. My friend's warning suddenly felt too small compared to the truth flashing across the screen. But the messages weren't the worst part. The worst part came when I checked his email, something I had never done before. A notification popped up about a bank transfer, money sent to an account under the same woman's name, then another, and another. Small amounts, spread out over weeks, disguised as business expenses. I opened the files attached to the transfer's restaurant receipts from places he told me he stopped visiting years ago because they were too expensive. Hotel bookings, always for 2 flower orders, vouchers, gifts. He wasn't just cheating, he was building a life outside of ours, using money we had both earned, saved, and sacrificed for. Money meant for our retirement, our home, our future. He had taken pieces of our life, pieces I had held together through hardship and age, and handed them to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a wallet and a weekend escape. I didn't cry, not a single tear. Instead, I felt something inside me settle, like a puzzle falling into place. Every late-night excuse, every long meeting, every sudden business trip now had a face and a date attached to it. I saved everything, every screenshot, every receipt, every reservation. I forwarded copies to my own email. I made a folder on a USB drive and labeled it with today's date. I organized every piece of evidence carefully, calmly, the way a mother takes care of her home. There was no trembling now, no fear, only clarity. As I packed the USB drive into a small box, I realized something simple but powerful. He had underestimated me. He had assumed my age made me weak, that my kindness made me blind, that my quiet nature meant I wouldn't look deeper. He had spent years believing I would never question him, that I would cling to the marriage no matter what he did. But he was wrong, very wrong. By the time he returned home that evening, I had already spoken to Claire, my oldest friend, a retired lawyer who had helped dozens of women walk out of marriages ruined by lies. When she answered the phone, I told her everything. She didn't gasp or hesitate. She just said, "Gather every detail. Bring it tomorrow. We'll start from there." Her calm voice made me feel steady, strong. For the first time in years, I felt my power returning. And as I stood in the kitchen, hearing his footsteps approach, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. He had taken me for granted, but he had no idea that the woman he betrayed was the same woman who would take everything back, piece by piece. I sat on the edge of my bed with his tablet still glowing in my hands, the light flickering across the room like a warning I had ignored for far too long. I had already seen the photos and hotel receipts, and even that was enough to tear open a wound I didn't know I still had. But what I found next was deeper, darker. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just break trust, it breaks identity. I opened a folder in his email titled Payments. My breath caught when I saw transfer after transfer made in small amounts, each spaced out perfectly, almost as if he wanted them to go unnoticed. At first, I thought it was a simple bank error. Then I clicked on the recipient's name. It wasn't a business partner. It wasn't a relative. It was her, the same woman from the photos, the same woman who smiled beside him in a hotel foyer as if she belonged to him more than I did. I scrolled through months of digital footprints, restaurant bills, spa payments, travel tickets, even personal shopping lists. Every dollar had come from our joint savings money that I had earned through years of choosing family over myself. Money meant for our retirement, our old age, our home. For 40 years, I had trusted the man sleeping beside me. I had trusted his promises, his presence, his silence. Yet here he was, draining our savings drip by drip, all to build comfort for someone who didn't know me and probably never cared to. My hand shook as I opened the messages between them. I forced myself to read every word because I knew the truth could no longer be avoided. He had told her things he never told me, where he wanted to travel, what dreams he still had, what parts of life excited him. He had shared parts of himself that I thought were long dead, and in each message he referred to me like an inconvenience, like a barrier between him and the life he wished he'd lived. He wrote, "Don't worry, she won't find out. She trusts me completely." That single sentence hollowed me out like nothing else ever had. Because it was true. I had trusted him completely. I had believed in his goodness, his loyalty, his sense of family, and he had turned that trust into a tool, a mask he wore while living a second life behind my back. I remembered every sacrifice I made for him, leaving my job when our son was born, taking care of his sick mother for 7 long years, cooking, cleaning, saving, stretching every dollar so we could live comfortably. I remembered how he once looked at me, with gratitude, with admiration, with love. And now, all of that felt like a faded photograph left too long in the sun, something once alive, now barely visible. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't a sudden mistake. It had been happening for years. He had learned how to hide the withdrawals, how to lie smoothly, how to flatter me just enough to keep me from looking too closely. I wasn't living with a man who slipped into temptation. I was living with someone who built an entire system of lies, someone who made sure I never saw the cracks until the entire foundation crumbled beneath me. And with each new detail I uncovered, something inside me shifted. The shock melted into a cold, steady kind of clarity. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't crumble the way he probably expected someone like me to crumble. Women of my generation learned how to endure, how to stay quiet, how to survive storms, but we also learned how to rise when the time demanded it. I realized then that my marriage had been over long before that hotel check-in, long before the perfume on his jacket, long before the late-night messages. The love I thought we both protected had already died. He had simply buried it without telling me, but I wasn't going to let him bury me too. As I closed the tablet, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace, it was purpose. The kind of purpose that comes only when a person has been pushed too far for too long. I knew then that I wasn't going to confront him with tears. I wasn't going to beg for explanations or apologies. I wasn't going to let him dictate the ending of our story. Instead, I would do what he never expected. I would fight back, not with anger, but with evidence. Not with noise, but with quiet, deliberate action. Not with heartbreak, but with justice. He thought he could build his secret life brick by brick. He had no idea I was about to take it apart piece by piece, until there was nothing left of it but dust and regret. I waited until evening, until the house was silent and the weight of the day pressed against the windows like a storm waiting to break. I sat at the dining table with every piece of evidence laid out in a neat, cold line. The hotel receipts, the screenshots from his tablet, the bank transfers, the photos he thought he had hidden, the messages he believed I would never see. I arranged them slowly, carefully, the same way I used to arrange his shirts on laundry day, except this time there was no affection in my hands, only a steady, hard purpose. When he walked through the door, humming softly like he always did after lying to me, I didn't greet him. I didn't ask how his day was. I simply looked at him, and something in my eyes must have told him that the world he had carefully constructed was about to crack open. He froze halfway across the room when he saw the papers spread out like a map of his betrayal. His smile disappeared. His shoulders stiffened. "What's all this?" he asked, but his voice wasn't steady. It trembled the way a guilty man trembles when the truth finally stands up in front of him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him with dramatic words. I pointed at the first receipt, the Blue Marlin Hotel, dated exactly the day he claimed he was meeting a supplier. Then I pointed to the photo of him sitting across from that woman, his hand resting on the table near hers, his eyes glowing in a way they hadn't glowed for me in years. I watched his throat tighten as he swallowed. He didn't deny the photo. He didn't deny the hotel. He didn't deny anything. Instead, he dropped into the chair across from me, his knees shaking slightly, as if the weight of his lies had finally grown too heavy for his body to carry. He whispered, "I can explain," but I raised my hand to stop him. For decades, I had listened to his explanations, excuses for late nights, half-truths about money, vague stories about important clients. Not tonight. Tonight, the only voice that mattered was mine. I told him I knew everything. Every message he had sent, every bill he had hidden, every amount he had transferred to that young woman's account. I told him how each discovery had stripped away the image of the man I thought I had married, leaving behind someone I barely recognized. He stared at the table, unable to look at me, his fingers trembling near the papers, as if he wanted to sweep them away and pretend they never existed. But there was no pretending left. The truth sat between us like a harsh light, exposing every crack. Then I gave him the ultimatum, calm, clear, without a single tremor in my voice. "You will sign the transfer papers," I said. "The house, the savings, the retirement funds, everything that we built together. You will sign them over to me today. If you don't, every picture, every receipt, every message will go straight to the people you fear the most, your company, your friends, your family, and yes, even the woman you've been funding. Everyone will know exactly who you are." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like gravity itself was pressing down on the room. He looked up at me slowly, his face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing as if he was searching for words that didn't exist anymore. He whispered, "Please, don't do this." But I didn't bend. Not this time. Not after everything he had taken. My trust, my peace, my sense of safety in my own home. I told him he had already done this to himself. He had built the trap brick by brick, lie by lie. I was simply opening the door and letting him step into it. His hands shook violently as he picked up the pen. I watched him sign each page, his signature slowly breaking, turning messier with each stroke. By the last document, he looked older than I had ever seen him. When he finished, he pushed the papers toward me silently, his eyes glassy. I gathered them without a word, placing them neatly in a folder. The same calm, steady way a woman gathers the final pieces of a broken life before she starts building a new one. When he stood up, he didn't look at me. He picked up his jacket with shaking hands and walked toward the door like a man leaving the ruins of a home he thought would never crumble. I didn't follow him. I didn't ask where he was going. I simply listened to the sound of the door closing behind him, quiet, almost gentle, a sound that felt like the first real breath I had taken in years. When the papers were finally signed, there was no loud ending, no shouting, no final explosion of anger, just a long, heavy silence that settled over the house like dust. My husband stood there with his shoulders slumped, the pen still shaking slightly in his hand. The same hand that had held mine for years now looked empty, weak, as if stripped of everything it once used to take for granted. I watched him look around the living room, taking in the furniture, the photos, the walls he once called his, and I could tell he finally understood what he had lost. Not the house, not the money. Me, the woman who had stood beside him for 4 long decades. He packed his bags quietly, moving slowly, avoiding eye contact as though meeting my eyes would force him to face the full weight of his decisions. I didn't help him. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer forgiveness. I simply stepped aside and let him carry the life he had destroyed out the front door, piece by piece. Each suitcase, each small box felt like the end of something I had once held tightly in both hands. But instead of pain, I felt something else. Space, space to breathe, space to stand, space to exist without bending myself into shapes to keep someone else comfortable. Space I didn't realize I had needed for years. When he finally walked out, he paused at the door and looked back at me. His eyes were red, almost pleading, but I didn't lift a hand. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even blink. He had made his choices long before this moment. And today, I was simply making mine. He stepped out into the evening light, a man suddenly aware that the world outside would not protect him the way I once did. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The first sound of a new life beginning. The first night alone felt strange. The house was quiet, still, as if waiting for something. I walked through each room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, adjusting frames, sipping tea at the table where he once sat, telling lies with a soft smile. And then something happened. Something small, but powerful. I exhaled. For the first time in years, my breath didn't feel trapped in my chest. I realized I had been holding myself together while he tore our life apart piece by piece. And now, without his weight pressing on me, I felt light again. Tired, yes. Worn, yes. But free in a way I hadn't felt since I was a young woman full of dreams. The woman he cheated with didn't last long beside him. Within a week, she blocked him, disappeared, and left him stranded with nothing but the clothes he took from our home. I heard through mutual friends that he tried to contact her again and again, begging for attention the way he never begged me for forgiveness. She had used him for what she wanted: money, gifts, the thrill of being adored by a married man. And when I cut his resources off, she vanished like smoke. The man who betrayed me was now alone with the pieces of his poor choices. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life quietly. I changed the locks, updated the accounts, reclaimed what was mine. I bought new curtains, repainted the living room, moved the furniture around small things. But each one felt like taking my home back inch by inch. I started cooking meals I loved instead of meals he preferred. I watched movies he would have complained about. I slept diagonally across the bed, taking up space I had never allowed myself before. Every small change felt like I was stitching together a new version of myself with steady hands. And then, something unexpected happened. I began to receive messages from women in the community, neighbors, old classmates, even strangers, telling me how proud they were of what I had done. They said they wished they had my courage. They said they wished they had left earlier in their own stories. I read each message slowly, letting their words settle into my heart. For the first time, I realized my actions weren't just about me. They were a reminder to other women, especially women my age, that we are never too old to stand up for ourselves. 2 weeks later, he tried calling me. I let it ring. He sent messages. I didn't open them. He came to the house once, but I didn't answer the door. I watched him from behind the curtain. A man who had lost everything because he couldn't respect the one person who had given him everything. There was no anger left in me anymore, only clarity. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences, alone. And me? I stayed, in my home, in my peace, in my freedom. And each morning, when sunlight fills the kitchen again, I whisper the same thing to myself. I survived, and I rebuilt. When the dust finally settled and the last box of his belongings was taken from the hallway, I stood in the middle of my living room and listened, really listened, to the silence. It wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It felt like the first breath of air after being held underwater for too long. I realized I had been living quietly beside betrayal for years without acknowledging how deeply it had shaped me. And now, without him, the house felt honest again. I could walk from room to room without wondering what lie was hidden behind a smile, what excuse was rehearsed behind a closed door. I began rebuilding myself in small ways. I cleared drawers that had been untouched for decades, sorting old memories from old pain. I found letters he wrote me before marriage, warm words, full of promises, and I sat there wondering when exactly those promises had faded into habit. But instead of crying, I set them aside gently. The woman in those letters, the girl I once was, had no idea what her future would hold. And the woman I was now, older, wiser, quieter, had survived what would have broken that younger version of me. That thought brought comfort instead of sadness. For weeks, neighbors whispered, offering condolences as if I had lost a loved one to tragedy. I smiled politely. They didn't understand that sometimes the loss itself is the beginning of healing. Losing someone who lied is not the same as losing someone who loved. The grief feels different, lighter, cleaner, like sweeping out a room that has needed it for years. Even my son, who was grown and living hours away, called and asked if I was managing. I told him the truth. I was more than managing. For the first time in years, I was at peace. Peace came in unexpected places. In morning coffee, I made only for myself, not waiting for someone who preferred to leave without a word. In the quiet clicking of the clock as I read in the evenings, in the way the sunlight fell softly through the curtains, touching the floorboards he once paced during late-night phone calls he thought I didn't hear, I no longer avoided those moments. I embraced them as signs that the house was returning to me, becoming mine again. One afternoon, I sat in the garden trimming the rose bushes. He used to complain that the roses took too much time, too much effort. But as I clipped away the dead branches, I realized the plant wasn't dying. It was simply getting rid of what no longer served it, just as I was. I whispered to myself, growth needs space. And for the first time, I believed it fully. The garden felt alive again, without his criticisms shadowing it. As the weeks passed, people asked if I would ever forgive him. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. You don't forgive someone for them. You forgive so that the bitterness doesn't eat your own heart. I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him harm, but I also didn't pretend to excuse what he did. I forgave him quietly, in my own time, but I never let that forgiveness open the door for him again. Closure doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it requires distance and a locked gate. I also learned something important. When someone betrays you, it does not mean you were foolish. It means you were kind. And kindness is not a weakness, no matter how cruel the betrayal. Many nights I sat by the window thinking about all the years I spent believing love was about sacrifice. I was wrong. Love is about respect, honesty, growing together, not shrinking to make room for someone else's lies. But in losing him, I found me, the stronger me, the quieter me, the wiser me. I became a woman who could look in the mirror without questioning her worth. A woman who could start planning trips she had postponed for decades. A woman who could enjoy her own company, her own meals, her own space. Now, when people ask me if I miss him, I answer simply, no. What I miss is the woman I used to be before betrayal. But she is returning, slowly, steadily, with every choice I make for myself. And when I finally stood one evening in the doorway of my home, breathing in the warmth that now filled it, I realized something powerful. The best revenge is not anger, it's peace. It's rebuilding your life so completely that the person who tried to break you becomes nothing more than a chapter you outgrew. I closed the door behind me, turned off the lights, and whispered into the quiet house, "This is my life now, and it finally feels like freedom."